say. I was just standing in the lobby talking to somebody, and I thought somebody ought to be teaching the auditorium class. It's late getting started. And I realized I'm the one supposed to be teaching the auditorium class. I probably need to get going this morning. It is good to see all of you here. Glad that you're with us this morning. We are continuing our study through the 10:10 series as we are looking at great stories in the Bible that are found in chapter 10, verse 10 in the Bible. And to introduce us this morning, I'm not going to take us to our text of study first. We'll get there in just a moment. But I'm going to set it up with a reading from James chapter 3. If you'd like to go ahead and be opening your Bibles to James chapter 3. To begin our class this morning, a reading on the topic that we're going to be discussing. From James chapter 3, starting in verse 2. And this is taken from the NLV, not a translation that I typically use, but as I was reading different translations, this one really resonated with me. Verse 2 starts, "We all make many mistakes. If anyone does not make a mistake with his tongue by saying the wrong things, he is a perfect man, and it shows he is able to make his body do what he wants it to do. We make a horse go wherever we want it to go by a small bit in its mouth. We turn its whole body by this. Sailing ships are driven by strong winds, but a small rudder turns a large ship whatever way the man at the wheel wants the ship to go. The tongue is also a small part of the body, but it can speak big things. See how a very small fire can set many trees on fire. The tongue is a fire. It's full of Rome. It poisons the whole body. The tongue sets our whole lives on fire with a fire that comes from hell. Men can make all kinds of animals and birds and fish and snakes do whatever they want them to do. For the record, I've never seen anybody train a fish, but that's just another day's journey. But no man can make his tongue say what he wants it to say. It is sinful and does not rest. It is full of poison that kills. With our tongue we give thanks to our Father in heaven, and with our tongue we speak bad words against men who are made like God. Giving thanks and speaking bad words come from the same mouth. My Christian brothers, this is not right. Does a well of water give good water and bad water from the same place? Can a fig tree give olives or a grapevine give figs? A well does not give both good water and bad water. At the end of class last week, I shared that this was going to be our topic of study this morning, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 10. I'd go ahead and open to that if I were you. And even though I knew that the topic we were going to be addressing was the destructive potential of the words that we speak, even though that was the topic that I had been studying this week, I found myself in a situation this week where I did just that. I fell into the exact same trap that we're here today to talk about and discuss. Words have enormous power. Words have power to build up like nothing else. And words have the power to tear down like nothing else. It says that to control the tongue is one of the greatest challenges that the human will ever experience, will ever undertake. And this morning I can tell you from firsthand experience that that is very much a struggle that we all continue to battle on a daily basis. There's an old saying that says, like an arrow that is loosed from the string can never be returned, so it is that the words loosed from the lips can never be fully taken back. Today our text of focus is Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 10. And it talks about speech. Now it does so in a way that is, excuse the pun, proverbial, in that it doesn't come out and use the word speech necessarily. But what it does talk about is the very thing that James warns us of. Nothing can build up like our words. Nothing can tear down like our words. If you've not been with us, let me just reset this series of lessons a little bit. We've been studying what we're calling the 1010 Project, and what we're doing is we're looking at books of the Bible that have a particularly meaningful verse located, interestingly, at chapter 10, verse 10. This all started with a conversation that was had many months ago as I was relating to the elders that one of my favorite verses in all the Bible is John chapter 10 and verse 10. Jesus speaking there, and he says, I've come that you may have life and have it to the fullest. Josh shared with me that Ecclesiastes 10:10 is one of his favorite verses. And in the course of that, we got to thinking how interesting that both of us are impacted greatly by a 10:10 verse. And so I began a study of all the different books in the Bible that have a particularly interesting verse at 10:10. And we've found many of these as we've explored them in this series together, this semester together, that are particularly meaningful. Today we're in Proverbs chapter 10:10. We're talking about the importance of being careful of our speech. Not only the words we say, but the attitude behind the words we say. The writer in Proverbs 10:10 says this, "Whoever winks maliciously causes grief, and a chattering fool comes to ruin." The most basic overview of this particular verse includes two different options, two different paths, and two results that come directly from that choice. And I think that we can agree that at different times in our life, we find ourselves on both of these paths. We find ourselves on a path of winking maliciously. Now that's a very poetic little phrase, and we'll break down what that means. But to wink maliciously, it says the result of that choice is that it causes grief. The second option that we have before us to avoid is a chattering fool. And the result of a chattering fool is that he and those around him, as it says, comes to ruin. You know, this is very much in keeping with the way the book of Proverbs is set up. So much of the book of Proverbs is just an incredibly down-to-earth, very practical kind of analysis of how it is that we have paths of life that we can choose. The most common way that these paths of life are distinguished in the book of Proverbs is the path of wisdom and the path of foolishness. And if we really think about it, so much of our lives comes down to, in a moment of decision, we have an opportunity to make a decision that is wise, or we have an opportunity to make a decision that is foolish. And as we make decisions that are wise, we find that the results of those are in keeping with what we would expect. The Bible tells us that the results of wise living are good, beneficial, productive, encouraging kinds of results that bless not only ourselves but those around us. In contrast to that, we're told that the path of foolishness, to make a decision that is a foolish decision, is rife with all kinds of hurt and disappointment, all kinds of frustration and emotional, relational kinds of detriment to those around us and to ourselves. Today, this particular study falls perfectly into that kind of analysis as we look at wise and foolish ways to speak. Now, the author here really doesn't go into wise ways to speak in this particular verse, but we will look through the book of Proverbs today and examine some of the things that the writer of Proverbs tells us. These are wise ways to use our words. But if you're like me, one of the most powerful ways that we learn lessons is by stepping in it. One of the most powerful ways that we learn lessons in life is by the missteps, the mistakes that we make. And we look back on those, and if we are applying wisdom to our foolishness, we recognize that it is foolishness. And we are more equipped to hopefully not make those same kind of mistakes over and over and over again. At the heart of this verse, we have a description of a destructive person. Whether it's a chattering fool or a malicious winker, which that's a funny phrase, what we have is a person who either purposefully or inadvertently sets out on a path that destroys themselves, everyone around them, and causes great destruction to their relationships. The first of these is a very quiet, very subtle, very calculated kind of destruction. The other is a loud, careless, uncontrolled kind of destruction. But both are very dangerous. Both bring great damage. But they go about it in very different ways. Let's jump into the first of these two, the subtle destroyer. And this is a person who winks maliciously. And what we find in this is that they have usually in this an intent to hurt someone else, but to do so in a way that hopefully to them doesn't bring any blame. And this is something that is subtle, but it is incredibly destructive. The second category, the person who is the careless speaker, is the person who is reckless with their words. And by not being careful with their words, they harm themselves and bring all kinds of trouble to the people around them. In both of these situations, the first principle that we need to take to heart, is that the proverb here is trying to keep us safe. You know, so oftentimes growing up, I thought of rules as being incredibly restrictive. I thought of rules as being, kind of things that seemed arbitrary, that seemed to be almost oppressive in their nature. All my life, I've been a person kind of at their core balks against rules, balks against being told what to do. I still find myself here at 55 years of age being that little 3-year-old who stomps their foot and says, I want to do it my way. I want to do it myself. I don't want to be told what to do. And maybe sometimes you find yourself in that. But the book of Proverbs is an invitation to see life through a different lens. To see life as a series of not oppressive, arbitrary rules, but a set of guidelines that were given to us by a loving God to help us to have that full and meaningful and beneficial life that He wants us to have. I've told you guys this before, but my mom, when I was in middle school, had, my dad made it for her, a china cabinet. And at the top of this china cabinet, they still have it in their home today, in fact. At the top of this china cabinet was a little panel, a wood panel, and on that was beautifully carved these words: rules are for quality. Rules are for quality. I don't know that my mom necessarily adopted that sort of family motto exclusively or even primarily because of a very rebellious-hearted son, but it did leave an impact on a very rebellious-hearted son, as he was then and is still now trying to work through the real truth behind rules and the quality that they bring. Whoever winks maliciously causes grief. You know, today in our culture, we often think of a wink as a very playful thing. I often will tease one of my kids, and I'll give a little wink, and it's a way of saying to them, you know I'm just having fun, right? This is a playful thing. But in this culture, in this time, and in the use of this particular proverb, that wink is anything but playful. That wink is something that signals hidden intent. The proverb, the writer of Proverbs, Solomon, is going to use this expression of this idea of winking as something that is trying to give a deception between what is presented and what the true motive behind it is. It's kind of like the way we sometimes use wink when we know we're lying. We know we're not telling the truth about something, but we'll give a wink to kind of denote, I know I'm not being honest, and you know I'm not being honest. And that's really the sense in which he uses it. It represents a secret communication. I'm saying these things, but I'm really meaning something very different. It sometimes takes the form of inside jokes, the kind of way that we tear somebody down behind their back. This is, for those of you who were raised in the South, the expression, bless her heart, which has this great connotation that seems to be saying, I want God to bring good, and everybody who hears it knows what they really mean is, isn't that person an idiot? There's a secret little sneakiness to the kind of statement that's really made and what the true intent is behind it. It's an attempt to manipulate. It's a way in which we speak one thing, hoping that certain people understand what we're really saying and are signaling to them that they're on our side, that we're against someone else, that we have a deeper motivation. Saying one thing publicly and signaling something to someone privately is a form of deception that is, while disguised as subtlety, incredibly destructive to relationships. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of how the writer in Proverbs uses this in this way. He says, you don't have to turn to these, I'm going to go quick. He says in Proverbs chapter 6, verses 12 through 14, a troublemaker and a villain. And then later he picks up describing those people. One who winks maliciously with his eye, who plots evil with deceit in his heart. Proverbs 16 and verse 30. Whoever winks with their eye is plotting perversity. Proverbs 26 through 24 through 26. In fact, I said you're not going to turn to that. I will turn to that, and I'll ask you to turn to that too if I can get my eyes to focus on my page here. Because this is a longer section, but this one has a couple of different examples that kind of get to the heart of this deceptive way that sometimes we speak. Proverbs 26. There's a couple of verses in here that kind of hit to this point. Verse 6 says, the one who sends a message by a fool's hand cuts off his own feet and drinks violence. A proverb in the mouth of the fool is like lame legs that hang limp. Verse 9, a proverb in the mouth of the fool is like a stick with thorns brandished by the hand of a drunkard. He goes on to say down in verse 24, was it 24? I skipped a page. 24, a hateful person disguises himself with his speech and harbors deceit with him. When he speaks graciously, don't believe him. There are the 7 detestable things in his heart. And though his hatred is concealed by deception, his evil will be revealed in the assembly. And then verse 28, a lying tongue hates those it crushes, and a flattering mouth causes ruin. All of these different phrases here in this chapter and throughout the book of Proverbs kind of get back to this point that sometimes the words that are spoken are not spoken with sincerity, they're not spoken with integrity. And they can be spoken in a way that is actually deceitful, hurtful, manipulative. And there's a lot of ways we see this taking place. Let's just get to some real practical examples of how you might see this in your everyday life. You're in a meeting with a group of people at work. And as the meeting is going along and the proposals are being made and the analysis is being discussed and back and forth is taking place, you see someone who's smiling and in agreement and everything seems to be going along fine with their approval. But as soon as that meeting's over, they make a beeline to certain people to make sure that they start to spread division, to stir up trouble. It degrades whatever trust you might have in that person. And it makes you always wonder, can I really trust the things that they're saying? Because in one moment, they're nodding along and everything seems to be good. But as soon as they get an opportunity, they tear down everything that was spoken in that private time. When they had the opportunity to be clear, they chose not to be. Instead, to be sneaky later. We see it in social settings sometimes. A group of friends will be seated together, and they'll be talking, and there'll be these moments where someone will give a little bit of a snide statement, a little smirk, a little subtle kind of expression that clues to certain people in the group. You know what I mean. You know how this is. It means to exclude somebody. It means to mock somebody. And while they never say it directly, the people who are aware of it know exactly what's being done. And it causes cliques, and it degrades closeness. Sometimes we see it in our families. Sometimes we're all guilty of this, where we as a parent, let's say, have an opportunity to come out with clear and direct and concise correction of a child. But instead of being clear and being concise, we signal disapproval of them by our tone, by our expressions, by implications that we make. And we degrade that child. We build confusion when we could have been building clarity. And resentment starts to set in. This is very dangerous. It's very dangerous because a lot of times when somebody's called on that, they look and they go, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything at all. I didn't even say a word. But you go, I know what you were doing. Or, well, you just took it wrong. I obviously didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it. You're taking it all wrong. And so you can see that these can become very, very hard to unpack. And the deception is not only hard to confront, but it's easy for the person who's doing it to kind of sidestep responsibility. It causes deep emotional pain. And it harms the speaker in reputation. But it also harms all the relations that are a part of that. And a winking eye, that deceptive heart, is something that is descriptive of a dishonest heart, a divided heart. Psalm 12:2 says, everyone lies to their neighbor. They flatter with their lips, but they harbor deception in their heart. And this is something that the Proverbs tell us over and over again. It's reflected all through the pages of Scripture, that we need to be exceptionally clear with our words. We need to make sure that we choose them carefully. We need to make sure that the words that we're speaking are actually the true message our heart is trying to get across. Not to hide behind deception, not to sneak around and be devious in the way that we present things, but to be clear, to speak clear truth, and not to use hidden signals and secret manipulations and deceptions. It's easy to fall into. And it's something we need to be guarding our hearts against constantly. And while this one is, I think, incredibly destructive, it says in the Bible very clearly that this kind of language, this kind of communication will result in all kinds of trouble for you and for the people that you are in relationship with. I think this one's often one that we can identify quickly in our hearts if we'll be honest with ourselves. When we find ourselves in a situation where we are presenting something and we know it's not the true intent of our heart, there should be a warning bell that goes off and says, wait a minute, why am I being sneaky about this? When there is a temptation that we have to immediately run to somebody and build some kind of a secret alliance, when we want to go and we want to tear somebody else down, and we want to find somebody that will be an audience to our ugly talk about someone, there needs to be an alarm that goes off in our minds that says, wait a second, is this what God would have me to do? Is this the kind of conversation I need to be a part of? Is this the kind of message I need to be presenting? The person who is deceitful, sneaky, is a person who will destroy relationships, every relationship they step into. And it's a danger that we need to be aware of. The second type is a reckless destroyer. Probably not with the same kind of intent. Probably not with the same kind of intentional, evil heart. But this is something that a lot of us fall into on a regular basis. This is the one that I struggle with probably the most and have fallen victim to over and over and over again. And it's something my mom's getting a lot of play in today's talk. I probably need to
Wise woman.
Yeah, she's a wise woman. She is. Hurts me to say that because I'm usually the one that displays her wisdom the most clearly. But she would always say to me that, she'd say, Jeffrey, your mouth is running ahead of your brain. Your mouth is running ahead of your brain. And you know, if I had taken that advice from a younger age, I wouldn't be in the situation today where I'm still continuing to be a person who sometimes finds their mouth runs away while their brain hasn't had time to process it yet. What person who falls into this is there's some things that we can look at and examine in our life. A person who does this typically just talks flatly too much to start with. Just talks too much. There needs to be there needs to be a care given to words. And if we understand that the potential for damage that words have, we'll use them more carefully. We'll be more concise with them and not use so many. With many words comes sin, the proverb says. And there's wisdom in that. Roger.
Your mother's saying there is something from where we've started here that I've been thinking, all right? The tongue lets out what the heart is holding.
Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
And the thing is, if you can't control that part that comes out that everybody hears, that's where the tongue is hard to bridle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right, Roger. And that is absolutely a perfect segue to where I hope we can conclude today, because that's exactly, I think, the real, excuse the pun, heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is not necessarily the words that we're speaking. It is the heart from which those words are coming. And if we find ourselves deceitfully winking maliciously, as the proverb says, or recklessly running out and chattering, the thing that we really need to examine is more than just how do I control my tongue. The bigger question is, where is this coming from in the first place? What does this say about what I've really harbored up in my heart? Because it's what's coming out, and it's coming from somewhere. Talking too much is one thing. Yeah, Murray's.
Back to the winking category of things, I think it's pretty modern today that I see at work, is you're in a meeting and then the texting starts. And you later find out some of the undertones of that messaging, nobody want to say it loud.
Yeah.
On the street, because it's almost the same aspect as winking.
Yeah. Yeah, if you couldn't hear him, that's a great example. In that first illustration there of the winking, malicious eye, Maurice shares that sometimes that comes in the form of texting that takes place during a meeting. I have to admit, in meetings that I take place in, I don't have that, but my wife will often tell me that she'll be in a meeting, she'll be leading her team and talking about it, and suddenly there'll be this moment where she makes a statement and everybody looks down at their phone. And she immediately goes, I don't know what it was, but somebody's sharing something about me privately to everybody else in this room. What an incredibly divisive moment, right? I mean, that's got to be just incredibly disheartening. And some of you have experienced that firsthand. That's not something I deal with, but it is something she deals with. And you probably are in that same situation. And that is kind of today's version of the malicious wink. Is I'm not going to share this openly, I'm not going to speak this out into the crowd where I can actually make a difference, but I will make sure that a few key people in the room know that, hey, this is what I'm really thinking about that. That's a great example. Roger.
Jeff, is that something that, and this is a question, is it something that you keep that thought inside your heart and don't let the tongue bring it out? Is that okay?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Roger, I don't think that the key is to just hold in that deceitful, angry thought. I think the key is to be alerted to the fact that angry, deceitful thought is there. And that's what I was saying earlier about an alarm bell ought to go off. Not an alarm bell to say, I just said something bad, which it should if it gets to that point. But hopefully the alarm bell is, why am I even having this thought? What is truly behind this? What is the source of this? And how do I make sure that I change not only the fact that I say it, which of course you can't do, but more importantly, why I have it in my heart in the first place. Yeah, Jim.
My thing is usually is
Yeah. The only thing harder, I think, than trying to really grapple with the realities of our own heart is trying to grapple with the realities of somebody else's heart. Man is above all things deceitful. And we are first and foremost deceitful to ourselves. And it's hard enough to figure out our own psychology. When we try to figure out the psychology of others, I think we just go down a path that's probably going to be fruitless. But I think it is something that, you're right, it leads to the frustration. Very good. I should have paused at the end of that last one to make sure I got your comments, and I'm sorry I didn't. Anything else on that?
I mean,
Yeah.
a really funny thing that I deal with all the time, because like I'm like a commissioning superintendent for like my electrical contractor, and then like we'll have a general contractor that is like over the whole job, and so I'm constantly in these meetings to like where the general contractor is withholding information or like airing out information because they're trying to make it like your fault. To like, but you know that it's like not your fault, and it's really like the GC's fault. So I'm kind of like known at my job to like where I have like my mouth gets away all the time too, because I'll just like throw out everybody's problems all at one time in a meeting to like where the meeting is set up to like where the GC's trying to blame us, we're trying to blame them, and I'll be like, well, they'll be like, Ryan, what do you think? And I'll be like, well, we did this wrong and you did that wrong, and so it's everybody's fault. And then like everybody's like, oh yeah. You know, why'd you do that? And I'm like,
because that could actually solve the problem. Yeah. That could actually get us somewhere. Yeah, because that's what good communication is. It's being honest and it's laying out the facts. Yeah, I think.
So sometimes my area superintendent would be like, we're not gonna have to go to this meeting.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, cool, because he knows that like I will absolutely blow up the whole thing and be like, this is what we did wrong. This is what you did wrong. Just like fix it.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, in all honesty, there's something really good that comes from being honest and integrous about what needs to be said and having the courage to say it openly rather than behind the scenes later going back and
calling the meeting with your regional.
It's right, right.
And he's like, hey,
it's not always appreciated by everybody.
Why did you tell them that that was the problem?
Very much so. So back to the chattering fool. Not only does a chattering fool tend to just be a person who just talks too much, but they tend to be a person who speaks without thinking, tend to be a person who has a tendency of being guilty of what my mom would call letting your mouth run ahead of your brain. One of the problems that some people who find themselves in that chattering fool moment kind of comes from a discomfort that they have with anything having a moment of silence. You ever been in a situation where there's just kind of a moment of silence and you have this instinctive need to say something? You got to fill the air with something. I'm reminded of a biblical example of this, and I didn't research this, so if I misquote this, forgive me, it just popped in my head. But as I recall it, when that inner circle of the disciples was up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, and Peter blurted out this statement where he said something. Carol's nodding, so I must be on the right track. Good, thank you. Peter blurted out this statement, something to the effect of, it's good that we were here. We should build these 3 tabernacles. The next phrase is something along the lines of, he didn't know what he was saying. There was a moment that was silent, and he was uncomfortable, and he just blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. He wasn't stopping to think about it. He wasn't weighing his words carefully. He just had a moment of silence that was uncomfortable, and he just said whatever came to his brain in that moment. And I don't know about you, but most of the time I find that the statement that comes to my brain in the moment is probably not the statement that I need to be saying. And that's the time that I need to be comfortable with that silence enough to sit and think about what I'm going to say before I do it. The last point is a person who is a chattering fool often finds that they say things that never should have been said in the first place. This goes back, Roger, to your point about why was it even in my heart in the first place, let alone coming out of my lips. But when we are saying things that best not ever be said, we find ourselves in that kind of a category. Yeah?
Reminds me of my mom saying, digging your own grave.
Yeah. I've spent some time with the shovel. I can relate to that, indeed. The word there, chattering, is an interesting word. We talk today about, I'm going to have a chat with somebody. We talk about chatting as being, casual conversation. But in the ancient Hebrew, that word chattering actually described a brook, a stream, that was uncontrolled by its boundaries. It was bubbling over, it was flooding. And it was just putting more water out than the bounds of that stream could contain. And if you think about it in those terms, that's actually a pretty good picture of what a chattering fool does. There are bounds of social constraint. There are bounds of moral obligation. There are bounds of relational care. And those bounds are not respected. And more words are flying out of the mouth than can be contained by the proper boundaries that should be in place. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 19, sin is not ended by multiplying words. In fact, some translations say sin is gained. Sin is increased by multiplying words. Proverbs 13:3, the one who guards his lips preserves his life. And I think in place of life, we can put a lot of things. The one who guards his lips, he protects his reputation. He protects his relationships. He protects his standing. Proverbs 18:7, the mouths of fools are their undoing. How many of us have been there? The mouths of fools are their undoing. Proverbs 29:20, do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. This also has some practical modern day application. My time's up, so I'm going to go really quick through these and hit the last point. Practical modern day applications, examples of the chatterer. One is the person who's the oversharer. The one who constantly just has to say everything they know. This is a person who loves to share all their opinions. This is a person who loves to, what?
Sorry.
Well, and there is a place for opinions, but not every opinion that we have needs to always be voiced. And this is a person who's quick to share the newest gossip, the newest little piece of news, the newest little tidbit that's spicy and tasty. You want to share it with everybody. The one who wants everybody to know how they feel about every single thing all the time. A lot of these things, without proper filter, can be really detrimental to your credibility and to your relationships. The second time that this shows up in modern application is the angry speaker. That the moment that there's any kind of frustration, the moment that there's any kind of agitation, without thinking, without carefully guarding the words, whatever that anger is, whatever that frustration is, just comes flowing out in the heat of the moment. And that's the thing. An arrow released from the string can't be brought back. And angry words that we speak without stopping to think about them, they cause damage. Another place that we see this today very, very prevalently is how easy it is with technology to share anything that's on your mind anytime without ever having to think about it. And there's just something so incredibly safe feeling about sitting behind a computer screen. Stuff that you would never ever look at somebody in the eye and say, you can say over a screen, you can say over an email, you can say over a text message, you can say on a post, but you would never say those things to that person face to face. But there's something very protective about seeing it on the screen, that we feel like we can just share anything without any recourse. You were going to say?
I'm just got a thought. The poetry of this is silent, instant communication from the chattering, non-stop, loud. This is poetry, and there's nothing in between those that's okay either. You probably know people that can just tear you apart at just speaking in a calm, everyday language.
Yeah.
You know, that was not mentioned here, but this is A to Z thing.
Yeah.
This is not.
A to Z and everything in the middle.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I appreciate us examining the A and the Z, but there's no free pass in the middle.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. That just because I'm not, maliciously winking, and just because I'm not, chattering and shouting and screaming, doesn't necessarily mean that everything else is okay. That there still has to be a great deal of caution exhibited in how it is that we share the things that are on our mind. Time has us. I'm going to just close up by going back to what I alluded to earlier. And that is, I believe, the deepest contemplation that we should have coming out of this message. We should ask ourselves, am I guilty of that chattering? Am I guilty of flying off the handle and saying things in haste that I would never say if I stopped to think about what its impact is going to be? Am I a person who sometimes can be very deceitful and sneaky, not be truthful about what it is I'm really saying and what I'm really meaning, but using all kinds of subtle deflection to get my message across in other sneaky ways? Those things all need to be examined in our life. But the bigger question is the question of how did we get there in the first place? When we find ourselves shooting off in anger and we beat ourselves up later to say, I shouldn't have said that in anger, the better question is, where did that anger even come from? When I find myself in a situation where I'm sneaking behind people, I come out of a meeting and I'm trying to tear down other people's arguments and ideas. I should say to myself, I shouldn't do that, but I should say to myself even more so, where does that even come from? How have I let that harbor up in my heart that I could even be the kind of person that's the thing that comes out of my mind and out of my heart? And so I think that first this is a statement of our actions. But even more so, it's a reflection of our attitudes and our heart and what's deep within us. And when we find ourselves having caused damage with the way that we've used our words, we need to take that as an opportunity to look deep within ourselves and see what the source is that we've allowed to come out of our mouth in the first place. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that's why it's so important that we take great care. The Bible says, above all things, protect your heart. Above all things, protect your heart. It is the wellspring of life. It's what everything else flows out of. And so, in a real sense, when I do fly off the handle and say things angry, it's reflective of something I've harbored in my heart. When I'm sneaky and deceitful, at the end of the day, it's more a statement of the condition of my heart than it is the condition of my lips. And so I hope that we will take these thoughts and put them into practice, allow ourselves to really evaluate deeply, not only the words we say, but even more importantly, the heart from which they speak. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate your time this morning, and we'll have a few minutes before we get into worship.
The book next week.
Oh, Roger, I had to look. It's on my desk. I don't know. Hey, you know what? Hold on. I think I wrote it down this week. I think I wrote what I wrote. Or Roger. Second Kings.
Second Kings, thank you.
Hey, Jack, I have a question.
Oh, cool. Yes, you told me that. Back home. No, nothing.
How do I get it to stop?
Well, I mean, tacking, you can put a Bible on it.
Yeah.
You could also put some tape or something. Tack it in or tack. We could put on
Oh,
there.
just like a push pin probably would work. Okay, I'll go get
Yeah.
2 push pins.
Just some of the